want to give a warm welcome to Carlos A. Fitch, who is today's co-moderator for our Transborder Agents of Change Symposium. Carlos A. Fitch is a research associate for the Transborder Scholar Collaborative. Also, he's a graduate equity fellow for CSU Long Beach and a CSU Sally Casanova pre-doctoral scholar. As well, he is a newly admitted doctoral student, just newly admitted. He will begin this fall. He will join the UC Santa Barbara Graduate School of Education, where he will be pursuing his PhD in education with a concentration in policy, program evaluation, and research. So it's a really real treat to be here in community with all of you, but also to co-host this session with Carlos. Carlos is also Transfronterizx from the Imperial Valley, Mexicali borderlands. A lot of the amazing things that have happened at SDSU Imperial Valley, as a matter of fact, have been under Carlos's leadership. He was AS president. One of the amazing efforts, one of many, is actually the Cross Cultural Center. I have to highlight his advocacy and the advocacy of students were what ignited the inception and implementation of that center, which is a beautiful space of inclusion for all our students at SDSU Imperial Valley. But that is who Carlos A. Fitch is our co-moderator. But we also want to give a warm welcome to our Agents of Change panelists that are joining us, and we're going to be presenting them in a bit. We're going to be sharing more about who they are. But just to begin, today we have a great symposium that is dedicated to highlighting the work of Transborder Agents of Change, who are centering their work in the success of our Transborder students across the education pipeline and along the U.S. Mexico borderlands, from policy, from practices in the classroom to art and multimedia. Before we go and into their sessions, we want to share a little bit about what is the Transborder Scholar Collaborative at San Diego State University Imperial Valley. So the Transborder Scholar Collaborative is dedicated to the social justice of our Transfronterizx students in education along the U.S. Mexico borderlands. We are Transborder scholars committed to implementing critically conscious research and practices through liberatory methodologies centered on the holistic student development of our Transfronterizx community in education. We are dedicated to fostering the success of Transfronterizx students through interdisciplinary approach to research and practice in education and transborder studies. Informed by our research, we prepare critically conscious border educators through initiatives that are centered on the critical consciousness of our community here at the borderlands. So now I'll go ahead and pass it on to Carlos Fitch.
Thank you. So hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. So what we're going to do now is setting intentions and grounding our positionalities right before we come into the introduction of all of the panelists that are donating 2 hours of their night. So what we're gonna do is get about 5 sentences that are intentions of this symposium that we have today, and we want to construct that together. So you are free to put in the chat anything that you hope to learn, given our title, and I'll go back to put the title right now, and we can come together to some type of intentions for this dialogue and what is also our positionality. So let me go back to the first slide. This is the title of our symposium, Transborder Agents of Change, Fostering the Success of Transfronterizx Students Across the Education Pipeline Along the Southwest Borderlands. So at this time, I'll like to get about 5 volunteers so we can come together with 5 sentences that represent the intentionality of our work and of our presence today in class. You can raise your hand or just unmute yourself.
Y como siempre, pueden participar en inglés, en español, en Spanglish. Y pueden o abrir el micrófono, la cámara, o solo el micrófono, or simply let us know your intentionality, qué intención tienen aquí, hoy en día, en este simposio, aquí en el chat. I do want to recommend one intention, and that is for my Transborder scholars. For our upcoming reflective journal, we're going to be looking at practice. So one intention that I'm hoping that you can get from here is some examples of what does social justice look like in practice, from policy, art, to implications in the classroom. So that's one intention I wanna provide.
Thank you, Dr. Falcón. I can also share one intention that I have today. So I know that we have panelists, guest speakers from all across the California and Arizona borderlands, and that is something very interesting. So I'm coming with a lot of intentionality and understanding how the differences of geography change the experiences of transfronterizx students. So being geographically conscious, I think, um, to our work and understanding those experiences given the distinct social conditions of states. So that is one of the intentions that I have. Anyone else who would like to share something? So we have in the chat, it says understanding ethnic backgrounds. Thank you, Esther.
I guess I'll go putting my efforts and resources out there. If somebody has like-minded ideas as the ones that I'll be presenting with me and my colleagues, that definitely reach out to see which ways we can collaborate.
Thank you, Julio. And one more that we can come up. Neda?
Hi. Yeah, I think connecting back to what you mentioned, how can we be in different locations but all connect and towards to helping others with their stories? How can our stories help us to help others and not just give it for granted?
Thank you, Neda. So just to, those are already 5 intentions, and for sake of time, I'm gonna move up forward. And just to, I'll keep reminding everyone of our intentions throughout the chat and the different presentations. So intention number 1, what social justice for transfronterizx students means, and what are the implications in practice in the classroom. The second one is being geography conscious. The next one is understanding ethnic backgrounds of transfronterizx students. The next one, putting out there the resources that each one of us have in support of transfronterizx students. And the last one, connecting our social locations and the power of storytelling when we are doing this work in service of transfronterizx students. Thank you everyone for sharing. And I'll move forward with a little bit of the introduction of this symposium. And it is this question: what is education for our transfronterizx communities? And what does education mean for us? And the way that I want to share this is through pictures. We can Google Transfronterizx or Transborder or students crossing the border. And these are some of the pictures that come up in Google. We have La Línea in Mexicali, the one that we can see now in contemporary times, the one that we saw 5 years ago, which is El Túnel que demolieron, and then we see La Casa de Cambio, and then the other one, which is the vehicular line that many of us do. And the way that I think about these pictures and how all of these have education embedded within one another and particularly for Transborder, Transfronterizx students, is through the hidden learning lessons that each one of these have. So we think about the first image, which is doing línea, hacer la línea every morning, every so often, a pie, a carro, however you do it. And to me, that is a lesson of time management. And that is very much utilized every single day within academia, within the classroom. We have to have notions of time management. And that is something that is coming from our border crossing interactions and the time we spend. We also have this other picture that I also put in the previous slide. And being in La Linea, it makes you, you have to socialize with the one that is before you and the one that is after you. And if you want to give this spot to a family member, a friend, quieres que alguien se meta, le vas a hacer el favor, that is socialization. But in this picture, we also see the policing and the militarization of the border. And how do we negotiate our identities as students? What does it mean having a uniform or a backpack as a form of protection and saying, you know what, I'm a student, don't bother me, don't harass me, because I just want to go through the line and go to school. The Casa de Cambio, that is another learning lesson that we navigate those students, transborder students, que desde kinder, they've been crossing the border and they have to think in dollars and also in pesos. This is a financial reality and a financial duality. What does it mean to be part of two different financial worlds? And how do we change this currency, not only when we are purchasing goods and services, but also how do we work for it? And this is all the racial capitalism that exists within our border communities. And the last one, those of us who have the privilege of crossing the border through a car, with a car, do we think about the environmental challenges and the contamination and pollution that we're contributing through, but also the the last minute decision making of changing the lines, you know, ¿cuál está más rápido? ¿Cuál está más lento? Which one has the white officer in la caseta? Which one has the Latinx officer? And do we want to go through which one? So those last minute decision making are also informing our everyday practices within education. And so all of this is what I call educational transborderism. And this is a term that I came up with in my last study, and I define it as the ongoing learning process of transfronterizx students through a variety of lessons that are not limited to traditional classroom instruction. And all of these are basically experiences of learning that are external to any institution of education or any systemic institution. But the point is that all of these learning process and lessons, they create an epistemic knowledge within Transfronterizx community that is shared within our cultural and ethnic identities. And so there are various forms of experiences that lead and build our educational transborderism, as we can see in the screen. The first one, familial and cultural forms of knowledge that are transmitted through transborder involvement within the borderlands, at the borderlands, but also when we go away from the borderlands. There's another example, which is the identification of racially dangerous situations, depending on who is attending us when we are given a passport, what are the expectations that we have when we are crossing the border, and how are we navigating our ethnic identity. The middle one is the development of mechanisms to defeat time hypervigilance. There are some institutional ways and systemic ways, such as applying for sentry, going through that interview, and getting that card so we can defeat the time and defeat the line. And there's other ways, which is el compañerismo, el dejar meter a nuestros amigos a la línea, so we can defeat that time together collectively. The next one is the mediation of residential nativism and racist nativism. I want to focus on the residential nativism that many of our students experience in K through 12, which is basically when we are using the addresses of our tias or tios or familias, so we can mediate that residential nativism that exists within K through 12 and also higher education. So those are also some lessons and experiences that inform our transborder or educational transborderism. And then the last one, which is what we can see very often or every day in our lives, which is the border crossing practices that become rituals of transborder students. So the fact that we all wake up at the same time, 5 a.m. before the sun is on, these are rituals that we are exploring and creating within our lives. And all of these scenarios and experiences and many others that I am not putting here, they all form what I call Transfronterizx cultural intuition. And cultural intuition is a term or a lens that was developed by Dolores Delgado Bernal in 1998, a Chicana feminista who argues that cultural intuition is the validation and the uplifting of unique perspectives of communities of color. So all of these experiences that we have and all of these lens and all of these unique perspectives are framed because we are part of the ethnic diversity and part of the immigration diversity in the United States. Cultural intuition is then informed by 4 practices: personal practices, professional practices, the literature that exists out there, and the analytical perspectives that we have. And so all of these is to introduce our panelists and introduce what we are talking about today, which is transborder agents of change and how the cultural intuition of all of our transborder agents of change inform in their practices, in the way that they challenge the status quo to transform education for our transborder students. So as we move into the next section of the symposium, this is a question that I would like everyone to have in mind. So how can we as Transfronterizx educators utilize our cultural intuition to create a new meaning of education? And so with that, I'll pass the mic to Dr. Falcon and to Sara and Julio for the first part of the symposium.
Okay, Carlos, thank you so much. All right, so Sara and Julio, if you don't mind, please go ahead and share your screen. We're going to begin by presenting about our work at Transfronterizx Futures. And as my colleagues here share their screen to highlight the work that we've accomplished over the last 5 years, if not more, I do want to formally introduce my colleagues. So I will introduce Julio, and Carlos will introduce Sara. I do have to say, before formally reading their bios, we've been at this work for more than 5 years. We actually started at SDSU through student organization, then a program, an ally program actually, and now we're expanding to a nonprofit. And outside of the ivory tower, really rooted in the community. And I believe that for change, for social change, we need to work in all levels and all areas. And I'm so proud that we get to do this work and in the inception of this nonprofit in our community. And we've began at the San Diego Tijuana borderlands. That's where our work and organizing efforts began, but our vision is to take this along the U.S. Mexico borderlands. But before talking about our work, I do want to formally introduce my amazing colleagues here. So I'll introduce Julio. Julio has written, produced, and directed a handful of short documentaries: While We Wait, Ruta 40, Cocineras, and as well as he's worked in mainstream production like Selena, the series. He's founder of the Vimana Studio at San Diego, which is San Diego Tijuana based, and which is a production house, and he collaborates in different multimedia projects with other creators from the region. He has also served here at Transfronterizx Futures as our media director, and in this work, we've developed podcasts, infographics, documentaries, all centered on the inclusion validation of transborder students. And representation matters, and when you see yourself represented, it really does create that space of validation. So that's just a little bit about my amazing colleague here, Julio. But now also with us is Sara, and Carlos will read more about who Sara González Quintero is.
Yes, so Sara González Quintero is a Transfronterizx sociologist and also serves as Associate Director of the Transborder Student Ally Program at San Diego State University. She lives in Imperial Beach, and she also serves as co-vice president and public relations representative and social media coordinator of the Transfronterizx Ally Student Organization, also at San Diego State. Currently, she's a social justice advocate, border scholar, and academic coach along the Tijuana and San Diego border region. And I also have to say, she's a great artist. That is another side of her that I'm learning about her as we continue our friendship. And thank you for being here, Sara.
And I also want to do just a shameless plug here. Sara has been my co-organizer for over the last 5 years, if not more. And a lot of these initiatives and efforts have been side by side, hand in hand with Sara. And it's just an honor to have, collaborative and work with Sara, but also to continue to collaborate, work together, and grow.
Well, thank you so much for that nice warm welcome. I appreciate all of my colleagues on the call being here, and I feel honored as well. And like Vanessa and Carlos expressed, it's a lot of community work, and we've worked for over 5 years together. So it's definitely been a team effort. We do not have an eye in this in our team. So thank you all for being here. So our presentation is titled Transfronterizx Optics, Storytellers of the San Diego Tijuana Borderlands. And well, today we'll be talking a little bit of what Transfronterizzo Futures is, and specifically on representation and taking media initiatives to be able to tell the stories of our students and the realities. This work started by a group of students coming together and realizing that literature and the media was not portraying our real stories. And so therefore we have taken upon us to be able to reflect the realities of the borderlands and the real struggles that students go through with it. So we'll get started. So I would like to introduce and acknowledge the whole team at Transfronterizx Futures. You already introduced Julio. We also have another organizer, Vanessa Flores, who is not here today, but she's also a performer. And so she got a great opportunity to embark on and work at this great production. So she's not present today, but her effort and presence, it was much needed to impulse these initiatives. We have myself and Dr. Falcon as well. We were all integral in coming together, and I'll talk as we go along the presentation a little bit about a background. So we can't continue on the conversation without addressing what is the transborder or the Transfronterizx population. So Carlos contextualized us a bit of what the experiences that our students go through on an everyday or on a high frequency. But to define it or to put it in a simple sentence, a transfronterizx person is a person who simultaneously interacts politically, economically, socially, and culturally in two countries. That is different from being maybe an immigrant, because these are transborder students, and the population are in constant motion and in constant contact with two countries. So that changes the experience of a person and how they develop their vision of the world as well. So the transborder context and the transborderism relates to the way in which students and the population interact with the border. And so it's the context of the border and how they interact end up affecting their identity process. And Doctora Falcon, would you like to expand on this, since this is your work?
Well, more than anything, I think in a nutshell, it's important to understand that the border is a hostile environment, and to exist and be able to persist and resist the borderlands. We have to adapt in many ways, from the challenges we face to linguistically and culturally. So all of that affects our identity in different ways, from feeling like we don't belong anywhere, to feeling like soy de aquí, soy de allá, o ni de aquí ni de allá, and feeling in between, spaces, code switching and translanguaging. And then most importantly, and what you will see here and what everybody's already seeing here, is that agency, resistance, and belonging at the borderlands. I won't present it here, but something also very important to identity is the intersections of our social identities. So what is race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender expression? What does all this mean? What does all that mean for our experience at the borderlands and how we experience the crossing of the border? But that's just a little bit about what consists of this transborder identity development.
And it is often said that there's much privilege for being able to cross a border, but within that experience, there's still a lot of resistance and a lot of resilience that our students need to go through to be able to embark on their educational journey. And that's where we are coming in to be able to tell the stories of these students. So, about us, we're a forthcoming nonprofit that is dedicated to support transborder students and their families along the San Diego-Tijuana borderlands, because that's where most of us are located. But as Vanessa had expressed, this is a vision that it intends to go much fuller to the extent of the U.S. Mexico border. And so we are just in search of promoting the social justice. That means in providing housing, probably providing the needs that these students are in need, such as food and housing insecurity, being able to be vocal and be able to express their story. So our initiatives are focused on 3 umbrellas, and today we are going to talk about one of them specifically. And so, a little bit of our background. We all met back when we were in college back in San Diego State. And so we all came together as a student organization called PASO. It started off with a couple of students, then the word got around about a group of students having the same experience of crossing the border and not feeling identified in their school setting. So we all came together and expressed our stories and saw that we had something that we shared, which was that invisibility, that not being able to express our real educational journey to be able to get to college. And so therefore we decided to create a space of where people could come together and speak their stories, but also provide initiatives for the university and recommendations of, hey, we have this student population that is present, but the institutions were not serving our student population. And so aside from the student organization, we grew to create a TSAP, which is the Transborder Student Ally Program, after a couple of years, and where we aim to support teachers in providing context of the student population within the borderlands. And so we were able to provide trainings for both high school and higher education. And it was a great time to be able to connect with educators along the borderlands and institution leaders and tell them what are some of the needs and some of the challenges and how were they able to support in their specific roles. It was a very immersive type of situation. So we were very, very lucky to be able to host this for our teachers. But now we're presenting today a Transfronterizx optics. So more about the umbrella of our organization that focuses on bringing the narratives into light.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
The organizations you just met, are those like independent from the higher education institution, or are they part of a department, or how does the structure work?
Yeah, so they're at a grassroots level. What I did in this phase of this work, it was apply for a grant and then to develop a program. So first it was a student organization. So as you know how student orgs work. Then as a doctoral student, it was the Transborder Student Ally Program. And in these efforts, I did it through participatory action research. So meaning hand in hand, side by side, my colleagues here today in a horizontal leadership approach where the trainings that we would provide, like the Ally program, would be with students at the table and panels of students. And actually, at the time, I was a doctoral student as well. So they're part of the university, yes, or were at the time part of the university, yes, but at a grassroots level. So meaning not yet at the time supported by top-down efforts. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, but please let me know if I could provide more clarification.
Perfect, thank you.
And for the nonprofit, well, we actually saw that we wanted to provide more support for families. So then what felt a little bit easier to be able to provide more information and more resources for more students, not just at a specific university. Felt kind of natural.
Yeah, so definitely taking this work outside of the ivory tower and rooting it in the community, which is very important for change.
Hey folks, how's it going? It's a pleasure to has been a pleasure to work with my colleagues, Sara, Vanessa, and Vanesita, who is right now on tour performing. Something that we came up with was trying to answer the questions of representation, is how will we be able to show the transborder student experience in the mainstream? So it was important for us to come up with a project instead. So Transfronterizx Optic is just a catch-all, I guess, umbrella project in which we then delineated different initiatives. The mechanics of that would be participatory filmmaking. So that means, next slide, please. Previous slide. Oh, there you go. So the other one, next one. Am I getting a lag or is that? Okay, so that means that by participatory filmmaking is that the participants get to do the storytelling. And so me in my role there, I got to say, mentor, teach, help the people who were refeatured become their own storytellers or produce their own stories, guided by my hand and the vision of the project. And so we were trying to have them establish those faculties to be enabled, once we were done with this project of their story, to have them learn something, how to tell their story. So that would be, in that sense, have it be that sort of a education, mentoring, training, I guess, spirit that we want to imbue this project. Okay, next slide, please. So aside from providing them equipment, time, and resources, what came out of that was a day in the life, which is Vanesita Flores retelling her experience as she just went to day, through, get up, go through the motions and the rituals, all the way to school, and then come back. Then while we wait was an effort that we put together as we were invited to participate with a nascent project with folks from Colegio de la Frontera. And so in that collaboration, While We Wait was born, which is pretty much this mosaic of stories from people from different backgrounds and experiences. It had an element of introduction, of information, and most of all of an arc, a character arc of the people who had these experiences. And so a podcast episode came out of that, and a documentary web series proposal came out of that we actually presented to KPDS in their Explore Project program, which unfortunately did not make it to the funding stage. We made it to as finalists, but that unfortunately they didn't decide to go with a project, but the pilot is there. Next slide, please.
So, like Julio mentioned, a day in the life of a transborder student was aimed to represent the daily routines and the multiple stops that the students needed to go through before arriving at school. Being a transborder student goes with a bit of being invisible and transparent and keeping it hush-hush, especially at the elementary, middle school, and high school level. So therefore, having students be able to tell their own stories. We made an open call to our community to be able to have an open participation of who wanted to express what they were going through and encourage them to be vocal about it. As an academic coach all over the San Diego borderlands, I have seen that students downgrade their experiences, and often teachers express like, oh, every other student goes through that, but in reality, many students might go through that, but not many students make it into college. So therefore, this way, we were able to tell the stories that you're not alone, you're not the only one that goes through this, and your story is valid. Your story is valid. And it's worthwhile to mention that this project started also during COVID. So therefore, it was a lot of online interaction, and it was a little bit difficult to be able to actually have students reach out because it was still in that phase of being scared of what was actually going on with COVID. But we got a total of 12 applicants, and through them, we were able to work with some of them on this project. And so we were able to create While We Wait. And so as Julio expressed, it's a mixed media series and podcast hybrid that highlights the lives of the transborder students in the U.S. Mexico borderlands. And in reality, we wanted to answer how it is to be a youth and growing in this specific landscape. The experiences that I had as a transborder student are not the experiences that current youth are having in the borderlands. So therefore, it was very important to be able to gather the different stories and even being able to see if there were any changes within maybe an age group and their experiences growing up. It's worthwhile to mention that some of our participants are actually my students from I'm an academic coach, like I expressed in San Diego. So me as an educator being open about my identity and being transborder, it was easier for students to also open up about their experiences. And so we had students write down their narratives and their experiences, and Julio and the rest of the team guided them in towards of being able to analyze and go profoundly into their experiences. And so I think it's better to showcase rather than tell. And so we are going to preview just a couple of minutes or seconds on the podcast because it has an immersive component to it.
If I can say that real quick.
Please let me know if not.
Yeah, so the cool thing about this episode is that we, Edsel and Vanesita, we got to record their experience. And so we edit it in such a way that you feel that you're immersed. So if you have, say, ¿cómo se dice? Headphones with AD capability, you put them on and you'll feel like you're right there, basically.
No mames, las 4:30 ya muy tarde. Qué sueño. Mija, ¿ya te levantaste? Tienes que ir. Ok, ya. Arriba. ¡Qué frío! U.S citizen? San Diego. Physical? Nothing. Yes, these are my parents. I live in Mexico. U.S citizen? San Diego. Physical? Nothing. Yes, these are my parents. I live in Mexico.
Apúrale, cabrón, ya vamos tarde.
Ahí voy. Oye, ma, ¿me vas a llevar tú o voy a pedir Uber?
Sí, pues yo te voy a dar una pera.
And just for purposes of time, I'll have to stop it right now. But in that point, we were immersing both stories, and it was just trying to showcase the hecticness, the multi-tasking morning that our students go through to be able to arrive. And so kind of like that continuity of always being questioned at the border, of having to do this every day. So yeah, I hope that you guys enjoyed that little
I think
snippet.
we can share the link for this one.
Okay.
So just share the link and post the link in the chat, and at any point, whenever you convenience, you can just listen to it, put in your nice expensive headphones, so you can appreciate the I guess storytelling.
Yeah, I have to say, what we just heard right here does not do it justice. It's very immersive and just, I think, unique to our experiences at the borderlands. So I highly recommend at your own time, maybe after today's symposium, that you listen in and tune in to the entire episode.
One second, I am trying to get our presentation going. 1 second. Here we go. We're back on track. And so some of the things worth highlighting about it is, it's like Julio said, the participants record themselves, and they recorded their own transcript. They were guided by us, and they had a say in in the creative process, what were some of the things they wanted to add, one of the things that they wanted to omit. Sometimes we were being immersed into their life, and that could be a little bit intimidating. So we had to also limit how much exposure and also to be able to protect themselves or protect them if they didn't feel like opening up about a certain subject, which could have been due to family separation, immigration status, and other sensitive topics. And they wrote their own script and mental map. Would you like to explain a little bit of the documentary?
Oh, yeah. So this documentary is something that, again, that we work together as part of the While We Wait Transfronterizx Optics and While We Wait project initiative. One of the people featured in the podcast, Edsel, volunteered to be filmed on camera. And so we got to depict a part of his life in which basically his house got foreclosed on in Tijuana, and it got fue embargada. It was ¿cómo se dice embargada? It was foreclosed. It was
Post, yeah.
Yeah, it was foreclosed, and they lost, and so he had to basically leave his studies to get to work and work two jobs. Sometimes working regularly between 8 and 16 hours a day. So a very, very common theme in our borderlands, that people have faced housing and food insecurities, and they have to basically just face the circumstances. So this is a little bit of behind the scenes that we recorded as we were filming that project.
And to contextualize a little bit more of Edsel, he was on track to becoming an engineer, but because of the foreclosure and the situation at home, he decided to leave that and be able to embark on surviving the borderlands. And so this is a little bit of what we went through with him.
Oh my God, I was rocking those cheeks back then. So here's a documentary, guys, that came out of this initiative. It's 10 minutes long, a bit too long, but I'm sure I can post the link and have you guys, watch it at your own convenience. It's a story about what he went through and the circumstances that led to basically him having to cross the border every day.
If it's okay with everyone, I like to preview just a little bit because a lot of effort went into it.
Oh yeah.
So 1 second.
Maybe turn off your camera when we share it. Hopefully it will do it justice. And for my class, I'll offer the link and an extra credit opportunity as well.
There you go. I think the minute with the montage is around minute 5, I believe. I can't quite remember.
Let me see.
A little bit later. Un poquito menos, like 5:35. Right there, yeah.
I currently have 2 jobs. I'm a package handler for a big shipping company. My second job is that I'm a food handler at a mall here in San Jose.
And scene.
I work every day, at least 6 or 8 hours.
So yeah, we will make the link available to Dr. Falcon for students, and some of you guys can join and watch it. Next slide. And again, we apologize for pushing this through a Zoom channel, which flattens everything, both the bandwidth, the music, the sound. And so we'll make the links available for you guys, I guess, to appreciate it more. So some of the limiting constraints that we saw basically when we created this project were scheduling, participants work and study. They go to school and they work. In Ed's case, he worked 2 jobs. Obviously, geographical participants needs to sometimes be across the border while we doing the filming. The budget, basically, team didn't have any funds to assist like the participants financially beyond like mitigating just the operating costs. So in order to film Etzel, sometimes we have to pay him for the day just to not go to work. And so we can just film at his house. That was the amount of pressure that he was facing, that he couldn't afford to shoot his own life, to film his own life. So we had to find ways to be able to participate, So the self-censorship and policing, so these participants feel like putting their face out there or sticking their neck out is they might experience some retaliatory measures by authorities. Say, I guess we all feel that to some extent during our lives, and that's why much of our MO is leading lives in sort of secrecy, Obviously, the pandemic was a big obstacle. I mean, I don't need to go into details about that. Next slide. Do you want to?
Yeah, go ahead, Julio. Sorry.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I'm going to cover this or what you were.
Well, in reality, we saw the significance of this work. Like I said, Etzel was my student, and I knew him when he was barely in 9th grade, and I got to reconnect with him after he graduated high school and was going through all these life situations. So I saw a very big change when I reconnected with him, and being able to deconstruct and tell him story, or at least write it out. Even his mom noticed a change in his behavior and a change in how he carried himself, because he was facing a lot of realities that could not be changed because they were institutionalized, and he was just living that reality. He had to survive that reality. So being able to create safe spaces for expression, and more than anything, also tell him that he's not the only one going through this, and this probably won't be forever. Like, we have faced situations like that in the past, and we have still thrived. And so that's why I also think this network of transborder scholars is so necessary, because it prevents that alienation component. So there was a lot of significance to this work, or at least to the students that we work with. And so we seek to be able to impact others with the stories of our students in the borderlands, be able to provide resources and provide their needs. And that is and just talking about some forthcoming projects that we have. We are seeking funding to continue the While We Wait production. We're trying to create a mosaic of different stories, so we're seeking funding for that. And this is also an invitation for our future filmmakers or storytellers. We're in search of collaboration. And lastly, do you want to talk about Voices del Valle?
Yes, sorry guys, I seem to have sent to Falcon the wrong bio. So I work as a producer for KPBS Port of Entry. The podcast basically just tells cross-border stories, and some of the things that I've was thrown my way, and I was happy to accept, was this coming up project for taking place in Imperial Valley. So we are KPBS and the Central High School are in the process of signing an agreement about this, but it's basically just doing a podcast about being a high school student in como se dice, in Central Valley. And so basically just the city right across from Calexico, next to Calexico. And so just tell those realities, and most of the students there, there's a big Transfronterizx population there, sorry, not most, big. But yeah, so I'm excited about that project, and we're going to find a way to collaborate with Transfronterizx optics features.
But as we continue our panel of a stellar transborder agents of change, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next panelist. And Carlos Fitch will go ahead and present Mitzi Salgado.
Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Falcon. I had the pleasure of meeting Mitzi, I believe it was 2 weeks ago at an amazing community engagement event. But let me read the bio that Mitzi has. Mitzi Salgado holds a master's degree in international public policy and management from the University of Southern California. She also has a bachelor's degree in women's studies from UC Riverside. And prior to founding the Cultura Media, she worked at Harvard University administering Fulbright grants and placing Latin Americans' top talent in U.S. universities for the Department of State. Mitzi's mission is to help close economic gaps and information asymmetry for low-income communities of color, particularly Latinx and immigrants. And I was completely amazed by the testimony that Mitzi gave at the last presentation that we were together. And I'm so happy that you're here to share more about your work. And please take the mic, and I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you for being here, Mitzi.
Thank you so much, Carlos and Dr. Falcon, for having me today. And I'm very grateful for sharing space with everyone today. I have a PowerPoint presentation with an overview of some of the things that we do at the Transborder Institute. But I also have the original video that we released for AB 91. I hope we have time for both, but I'm just going to play it by ear, if that's okay with you. Okay, so let me see if I can share. Let's see here. Give me 1 second as I try to share from Canva. Let's try that. Okay. Let's see if we can do this. Alrighty, so let me go ahead and just present here. All right, let me just give me 1 second, you guys, as I'm navigating. Okay, this seems to be fine. All right, so thank you for the introduction, Carlos. So my name is Mitzi Salgado. I am founder and CEO of an organization called the Cultura Media. And when I met Carlos and Dr. Falcon, a few others here in the audience, I actually focused solely on the Transfronterizx Institute. But I want to just give a quick overview of what the Cultura Media is. The Cultura Media is a nonprofit organization that focuses on eradicating misinformation in education, education, health, and financial literacy for Latino communities along the U.S. Mexico border. That includes the Transfronterizx community, of course. within that, I founded the Transfronterizx Institute. And the Transfronterizx Institute, let's see here. Oh, okay, there we go. I'll get into what that is in a second, but first I want to talk a little bit about how we define Transfronterizx students. And I really like the definition that was provided at the panel Beyond Borders. I think that was a wonderful definition of it. For our purposes, since we focus heavily on policy, we define a Transfronterizx student as a bicultural student who lives within 50 miles south of the U.S. Mexico border, or basically within 50 miles, was born in the United States or travels between countries for school, work, recreation, or be with family in either country. Transfronterizx kids spend between 40 and 80% of their time in the United States and roughly 25% of their time traveling between countries. This definition does expand to students that are not born in the United States, actually, which I need to update that, because there are so many people traveling between the U.S. and Mexico border that I think needs to highlight that part as well. But I think it's really hard sometimes to describe what a Transfronterizx student is when you're in the day-to-day. For our purposes, we have to be very specific sometimes to define this, give this definition, and I'll explain why in a second. But more or less, this is what we would say a Transfronterizx student is. It's just someone who lives within the U.S. Mexico border, roughly 50 miles, and is traveling between both countries for school, work, recreation, or be with family, more or less. So what we do at the Transfronterizx Institute. So we have two focus areas. The main one is building civic engagement, autonomy, and career development for the Transfronterizx community, so students specifically. And the second part is advocacy and policy. And this is a big part of what we do. And I'll dive into each of these specifically. But what we mean by building civic engagement, autonomy, and career development, what we're trying to say is we want to foster development for Transfronterizx students through personal growth, professional development, and college readiness. So I understand as a Transfronterizz myself the importance of being fostered and supported, and as many of my colleagues have shared today, the feeling of isolation, the feeling of living in secrecy, all of these elements of being ostracized by the border and by having to cross the border, at least sometimes that feeling that I know I felt, can really be combated by being cultivated and supported in a community. And it's proven that you can overcome anything as an individual the moment that you have a community that can support you and uplift you and walk with you on your own journey as you go through life. And so at the Transfronterizx Institute, we understand that. And that's why we build this civic engagement. And I'll explain how we do. We kill two birds with one stone through that, but also creating autonomy in what it means to be a Transfronterizzo, in terms of having control of your own destiny as much as possible, meaning you can really, if you want to go to college for in-state tuition, for example, if you want to get, you want to have financial aid, if you want to be able to access whatever you want in the United States, you can, right? Like this sense of mobility and autonomy is so important to Transfronterizos. And I think it could be a huge defining factor for the livelihood and quality of life and just the ability to achieve what you want to achieve without any barriers as a Transfronterizo through this component of what we do at the Institute, right? And then the other piece would be career development. Again, many Transfronterizo students identify as first-generation college students. So in addition to having to face long border waits, desveladas, right? we're also looking at the first generation component of that, which also is a new layer of challenges sometimes in navigating the education system and just the United States as a whole as the first generation a person who is trying to figure out how to navigate this world, right? So we integrate all of those things together and provide programming to students that require this kind of support. But on another level, we're doing advocacy and policy. And so for the advocacy and policy, we advocate for inclusive laws, policies, and regulations that push beyond the traditional norms of what we think of belonging, right? And I say that in quotes because belonging is, what does that mean, right? So it's who belongs and who doesn't. And so we're every day challenging that through our advocacy and policy. So what are some of the current issues that we look at? Education policy is our primary pillar. That is, I would say, the number one thing that I do every single day when I wake up in the morning is focusing on education policy advocacy. And some of the issues that we look at are the AB 91 implementation, and I'll go into that in a second. In-state tuition and what that looks like for different institutions. Parent residency statuses that I'll get to briefly in a second. Title I, which is a program for public education, primary education specifically for California residents. And so again, challenging that sense of like belonging, right? Like we are constantly pushing that word to make sure that it's inclusive of the Transfronterizx community and that we are able to access all of these resources on an education policy level as residents that we are, right? And we can go into that as well. And some integration tools that we use and we sometimes face challenges with as well. And again, challenging the system while also facing the challenge of challenging the system, if that makes sense. Starting with the California IDs. So acquiring bank statements, acquiring a medical insurance, registering to vote. So all of those are tools that we use to create a profile for the students to be able to advocate for themselves, and also challenging the stakeholders that I'll be mentioning in a second to provide legitimacy of that belonging that we seek for students to have an open path to their own success and to their own autonomy to achieve whatever success that looks like for them, right? So for stakeholders, so who are our stakeholders? I started soft. I went with the Department of Motor Vehicles first because that is the front line. I call them the front line. They're the frontline staff, I would say, the frontliners. Once you're inside the border of who we deal with when we're trying to get this in-state tuition, which is the California ID, right? And so the DMV plays a huge role in our advocacy and our policy challenges. The second, I would say, would be ideally, actually, it is the first challenge that we deal with is Homeland Security. As you all know, that is truly the first interface that all of us have when we're crossing the border is Homeland Security, right? But for Transfronterizos, that looks a little different than for non-U.S. citizens and non-residents or permanent residents with different immigration statuses, right? So like for Transfronterizos who are born in the United States, their challenge with Homeland Security is not about their citizenship, which is interesting. For the Transfronterizzo community who is born in the United States, the challenge with Homeland Security is protecting their ability to cross the border quickly, which is a huge, I mean, it's huge for the Transfronterizzo community in general, regardless of where they're born. But if they're born in the United States, it's not whether they can come into this country, it's a matter of how quickly they can come into this country, meaning the Sentry program, global entry. So that is they unfortunately are part of the conversation, and I always say that they're a necessary evil that we have to deal with. And unfortunately, there's not a lot that I can do without Homeland Security. Unfortunately, they're part of the conversation, and I feel like they're just a stakeholder that I need to deal with. And so I would say they're a big player with that, right? Because it can change the quality of life significantly for a student, for better or for worse, just by having access to Sentry. The Department of Education is the next big player here, at the federal and at the state level. So the Department of Education dictates on many levels who gets, again, this belonging, right? Like who is eligible to receive Title I, who is not eligible to receive Title I, who is considered a resident to receive certain, benefits for FAFSA, for example. So they determine who gets what. And so the Department of Education, in some ways, has been open to discussing, at least at the state level, who gets what, right? However, I still think that there's a long way to go for the Department of Education to acknowledge the Transfronterizo community, at least at the primary education level, specifically regarding Title I, and being able to enroll in a public school as a Transfronterizo student without an address that is assigned to that school. And so I would say that is a battle down the road that we're slowly chipping away at and constantly challenging with regional leadership, in at least where I'm at in San Diego County. And it's been an interesting set of conversations, presenting, right, and explaining why Transfronterizo students are entitled to attending a public education, a public high school, public middle school, public elementary school, even if they live in Tijuana. And so really understanding the I would say their language and seeing how flawed it is, and how contradictory it is, that in my opinion is just an arbitrary reason to keep Transfronterizo students out, is also important to point out when we're doing this kind of work. And so the Department of Education, I would say, is also a very important key player here. The community colleges also play a big role because for many people, the community college is the first stop and the first step in acquiring a higher education in the United States for many people, especially because they're so accessible and affordable. But, I'll explain more on some of the challenges that we're seeing more recently with the community college system. And of course, the California State University and the UC system, both having their own definitions of what is considered an in-state resident for the state of California. They have their own appeal process, they have their own rules, and very specifically outlining who is entitled to what. Again, very arbitrarily, many of these are even contradictory. But I would say the last two key players speak more on the financial self-interest than the opportunity to include certain students. And so I would say from a policy standpoint, it's something that I know was something that I learned in my discipline, is understanding that trade-off and knowing how to leverage those needs for the end goal of getting what we need from them, right? So that's also been a long conversation and a lot of policy making with local legislators to basically, create a bill to introduce in the state of California to include Transfronterizo students to be able to have in-state tuition for at least the California State University, which I would say is a conversation that's more far ahead than the UCs, which is also very interesting to see, given the role that San Diego State plays on the border. I think they've been a key player in helping us facilitate that conversation, actually. So I think there's hope there. But these are the issues that we face at the Transfronterizx Institute, and some of the challenges and the key players that I guess play a role into all of these different areas. And just to kind of like go back a little bit to integration tools. By those, I mean, these are the same tools that we use to basically justify the student for in-state tuition. And to me, that's the North Star. If I'm able to achieve in-state tuition for all of our students and all of our Transfronterizx community, to me, I think we've done something special. And so for me, that's literally the reason why we're doing this, right? And so it's interesting how the program itself calls for something as, for example, voter registration. And part of the things that we look at is having autonomy, civic engagement, and career development. And the state is asking us for a voter registration card, which means that they're inviting us to be civically engaged in these conversations so that we can push and become more of a voice that needs to be heard, so that we can pass all of these laws and require the state to change these laws in favor of a more inclusive set of policies that actually allow Transfronterizx students to become residents. Because again, there are many ways to become resident, and I want to point that out here with the integration tools. All of those things that you see there, California ID, bank statement, medical insurance, voter registration, all of those things qualify someone for in-state tuition. All of those things the state recognizes, and many of the stakeholders that we're seeing here on the right side of the screen accept those documents for in-state tuition. So many students who are transfronterizos have a California ID. They have medical insurance. They can get a voter registration very easily, and they can easily get a medical insurance card. Not that easy, but somewhat easy, right? Like it's possible. All of these things are possible to get. And so if you are able to have all of these things, these are tools to prove that in-state tuition in the meantime, right? While we figure out a better way of including Transfronterizx students into the system. So I see it as like an interesting set of tools, right? It's like a toolkit that the Transfronterizx community has access to be able to mobilize themselves and acquire the goals that they need for whatever they want, right? Like whether that's through getting a higher education or getting a job or whatever they choose to achieve, right? And so these, I see them as tools, and they're, they're interestingly also are tools for multiple reasons, right? They serve dual purposes, especially the voter registration. So for me, it's very important that we mobilize as a Transfronterizx community, because I think the fact that we've been so mobile, and quite frankly, many times, at least for my case, I was in survival mode. It was sometimes hard for me to stop and think about my civic engagement, especially when I was a lot younger. And so that's one of the first conversations that we have, and one of the first orientations that we have at the program with the students, the importance of that voter registration card and the civic engagement, and the possibilities that can come with raising the voices and raising awareness on some of these current challenges that we're facing. So let's talk about AB 91. So AB 91 is becoming like, in a lot of ways, the I don't know, like the flag for the Transfronterizx community, because it was one of the first, if not the first law in the state of California that was passed on January 1st of 2024 that says people that live 45 miles south of the U.S. Mexico border along the state of California can attend a community college as a resident, for in-state. I literally have the law sitting right here. I read it literally constantly, because constantly analyzing it and finding ways to use this law, right? That is what AB 91 does. Such an important law. Let me just go over what that is in a second, right? So this is a very new law that passed this year. The fine print, which is the part that I really want to focus on, and the implications. The fine print of AB 91 is that, first of all, it's a temporary law, which means that it expires 5 years from now. So 2029, it'll be, AB 91 will be no longer. Also, only up to 200 eligible students can enroll under AB 91 in the community colleges in the San Diego region. So that includes Southwestern College, actually San Diego region and Imperial counties. Let me clarify that. So pretty much everything along the U.S. Mexico border, but 45 miles, pretty much going in both directions. So kind of like a mirror, 45 miles south and 45 miles north. So more or less that goes in San Diego, that would probably end at Palomar College, which is closer to Escondido, like leaving North County, San Diego, and Imperial counties. Southwestern College being out there, and I'm not sure if there's another community college out there in Imperial counties. So correct me if I'm wrong, but pretty much San Diego district, Southwestern, Cuyamaca, Grossmont, Palomar. What else? There are about 5 or 6 participating community colleges. But as long as they're within that 45-mile radius of the U.S. Mexico border in the state of California, it's fair game for this law. But only 200 students can actually enroll under AB 91 in the 5-year period. So it's not 200 per year, it's 200 over the course of 5 years, which is a very small number of students, which, raises a lot of questions. We can dive into the problematic mechanisms of this. Obviously, there's many, but this is a pilot bill, right? It's a pilot law. It's set to go on the legislative floor for the state of California in 2028 to renew. And basically, the community colleges present some of the findings that they have from this law to either vote in favor or against, or advocate in favor of against of it, to turn it into a permanent law or renew it for another 5 years. That's a conversation that we'll have in about 4 years, maybe even 5. It might get pushed out. The same assembly member, David Alvarez, is supposed to be the person to champion this bill again and sponsor it. Hopefully he'll still be in office by then to be able to do this. But again, this bill is not permanent. It is only 5 years as of now, and only up to 200 eligible students can enroll in the 5-year period, which again, very problematic. The implications. So what has happened since AB 91 actually got implemented January 1st of 2024? So while many of us that day were probably celebrating the first day of the year, the community colleges were actually having conversations about how they were going to actually mitigate this law and create new channels of, I would say, new channels of gatekeeping for the students that were going to come in, because many community colleges express that the floodgates will open, and this is literally the language that I heard at some of these conversations that I was having. And so what they are doing now is, 3 months in, 4 months in, we're beginning to see a crackdown on qualifying students for in-state tuition while this law is still being implemented. So just so you know, the law passed January 1st, but it hasn't been implemented. And as of now, my understanding is that it's going to take 3 to 4 semesters for this law to actually go into effect, get actually implemented at the administrative level at all of these community colleges. Now, 3 to 4 semesters is about 1.5 to 2 years into the law, which means that we won't have a lot of time left to actually take advantage of this law to its full fruition the way we would like. And so there are many students currently waiting for this law to actually go into effect so that they can enroll in the community college and actually start their academic journey, right? And other students are probably going to have to delay their studies until the AB 91 is actually implemented. Many people think that they can now go into a community college like Southwestern College and just enroll and that they'll automatically be considered an AB 91 student, but that's not the case. Anyone who's currently enrolling at a community college right now that is within 45 miles of the U.S. Mexico border in California is actually disqualifying themselves from actually benefiting from this law, and they're being labeled as non-residents, and to their surprise, they don't realize that it's because AB 91 actually hasn't been implemented. And so they're being asked to pay $3,000 or $4,000 per year for the out-of-state tuition fees for community colleges. Again, these are the implications of AB 91, right? Like creating other pathways or other, I would say, other channels for gatekeeping that we're seeing here. And I speak very frankly because this is a concerning unintended outcome of this law that we're seeing right now. And so what's the next bullet point here that I want to address? So, another part of the fine print here that I actually don't have on this slide. It's only for new students once the law is in effect. So if you're enrolling, even though the law has been passed, but the law hasn't actually been implemented administratively, there's this like weird cap, right? That, okay, we're waiting for the law to get implemented at the administration level, like, you know, for the community colleges to actually create a new application system and like funnel more students and like create a little section on their application that says, I'm an AB1 student, check the box. Like that, all that technical administrative side for the community college, they're figuring that part out. But while they do that, they haven't actually created any other mechanism to start welcoming students through this law. So there's this weird gray area right now between January and now that anybody that applies to the community college, and I'm just going to reiterate this because it's very important for everyone to spread the word, they're not going to get automatically received through AB 91. Like they're not automatically eligible just because AB 91 got approved doesn't necessarily, the community colleges are not necessarily equating them to being AB 91 eligible, if that makes sense. So that leads to the other concern that I previously mentioned. Students are going to have to wait, probably lose 1 year to 2 years of their studies to be able to be receiving the support from in-state tuition fees, right? Like that they save money to attend community college. And so while the community colleges are doing all this, figuring out how to implement the law, there's cracking down on qualifying students for AB 91 who have all of these documents that we see here. They have all of these documents, and yet they're still rerouting them to non-resident status because now they're enforcing this 19 years of age residency rule. So if, for those of you that don't know what that is, I'll briefly go over that. So 19 years of age residency rule means that at the community college level, at least at the San Diego City College and Southwestern colleges, if you're 19 years of age or older and you live in the state of California, you can prove that you live in the state of California, then you are eligible to become a resident. But if you're 19 or you're 18 and younger, so 18 and high school basically, you are not considered a resident if you live with a tía o tío, el abuelo, el abuelo, like un pariente. Like you're not considered a resident, even if you live here. But if your parents live in Tijuana or they don't live in the state of California, then you're pretty much grandfathered their residency status. So if you're basically a minor or 18 or not 18, right, like 19 and younger, and you live with an uncle or an aunt, but your parents live in Tijuana, your parents are sending you into the state to basically acquire your in-state tuition, you're not going to be considered a resident because your parents don't live here. So that is how they're now determining who is a resident. And this has been around, but it was never enforced the way it's being enforced now. So now they're sending students away. They're giving them this paper, which I'll show you guys. I only have it physical, I'm sorry. So it's this blue paper right here. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's literally saying, describing that law, that rule here. So they're this blue paper. That says, hey, so where do your parents live? Do they live in California? No. Are you 19? No. Okay, so you're a non-resident. So these other, these other mechanisms are popping up. All right, so moving on briefly to the civic engagement, autonomy, and career development. So these are some of the things that we cover on the education side, right? So going back to that civic engagement, teaching students to self-advocate and understand their rights. Again, all of these little rules and details that we go through with the students in detail and support them to become more autonomous. Again, autonomy being the next point, providing professional development opportunities as well, so students can forward their academic and professional journey. So, so they're able to navigate. So they have the knowledge, they have the tools, and then now they can navigate the academic and professional world more autonomously and freely. And also, it's the beginning of their journey, right? Like it's a constant learning, but at least now they have the fundamentals to basically carry their dreams forward. And then career development. That's another important component, right? So part of this first generation aspect. So enhancing their academic productivity, teaching them better time management skills if they need them, providing study tools so that they are feeling well equipped and supported to basically carry forward their higher education dreams. And then ways to support. I don't know how much time I have left, but I would love to emphasize that please support us on our website. You can subscribe to our newsletter there, and then follow us on social media as well. There we share many ways in which we can activate the Transfronterizx community to basically create a collective voice and actually advocate for some of these policies so that we can have a more inclusive space for our community to basically be open and transparent about the lives that they live and that they can thrive. Do we have?
So, Mitzi, I just want to say thank you for this very, very hard work, critical work, and for our community to practice our human right to an education. And if you need support, an extra pair of hands, or please count on us, especially in the implementation of AB 91 and then the extension, to continue it after those 4 or 5 years, and to be able to be inclusive beyond the 200 students. But this is a stride, a real stride for our community. So thank you for that. So we're out of time, but we want to offer the floor for questions from the audience. We have time for one question. I see here Esther would like to know, how are the 200 AB 91 students selected?
Great question. So they're first come, first serve. So right now what Southwestern College is doing is they're just putting everyone on a big, long waiting list. And then the first 200 that apply, once that application opens up, is going to be the student that actually gets AB 91.
Right. Okay. So a round of applause here, a virtual round of applause for this amazing work, insightful, critical presentation and analysis and advocacy of policy for my students in our multicultural education class. We often study law because law, really puts things into perspective in regards to rights and who's allowed the human right to an education, who has been excluded to the human right of an education throughout history. And here specifically this critical analysis and work specifically for our Transborder student community. Okay, so moving on, we're going to go ahead and transition on to our next panelist here. So we have Abraham Villarreal and Alexis Moreno Martinez. A little bit of background information about these amazing transborder allies. I met Abraham and Alexis a few years ago, a couple of years ago, soon after the pandemic. I was a visiting scholar for the Borderlands Education Center with the aspirations to, continue the advocacy and social justice work for my community, the transborder students. So learning, listening, and going along the U.S. Mexico borderlands, and specifically here in the Douglas Agua Prieta border region. And as I was working as a visiting scholar for the Borderlands Education Center, I had the great pleasure of meeting Abe and Alexis. And Abe and Alexis are exemplar allies for transborder students in their work, both inside higher education, but also outside higher education in the community. And this beautiful collaboration between the Cochise Community College and the Mexican Consulate in Douglas. But a little bit more about our amazing panelists here joining us today. So Abraham Villarreal is the campus dean for the Cochise Community College. He has also been one of the only 50 fellows for the Hispanic Association of College and Universities Leadership Academy, La Academia del Liderazgo. The one-year program prepares leaders for senior roles within higher education institutions, emphasizing Hispanic serving institutions. And Abe is passionate about the lives that we change every day in the amazing world of higher education. He believes that now more than ever, we need to give students of all backgrounds and origins the opportunity to quality education. And really, working as a visiting scholar for the Borderlands Education Center, I was able to see this day-to-day work with Abe, and how not only being the dean of the campus, but also even in the classroom and creating inclusive spaces for all students, and including transborder students. And also in this advocacy work, I had the great pleasure of meeting Alexis. And Alexis, it works for the Douglas Consulate. And bear with me here as I pull up Alexis' bio. I'm trying to multitask here. But a little bit about Alexis, and bear with me, I'll translanguage between English and Spanish, but Alexis holds a master's, maestría en Administración de Empresas, especialidad en Gerencia y Global de la Universidad de Monterrey, Nuevo León. También tiene una licenciatura en Comercio Internacional por el Centro de Estudios Superiores del Estado de Sonora, y también es técnico en computación por el Centro de Bachillerato de Estados Tecnológicos de Servicios de Agua Prieta. Y como les estaba platicando, aquí Alexis es coordinador del Instituto de los Mexicanos en el Exterior en Douglas, Arizona, en el Consulado de México. También ha trabajado en el Consulado de México en Tucson, y también en el Consulado de México en Albuquerque, en Nuevo México. Y también estando en Douglas, Agua Prieta hace 2 años, pude ver firsthand just his passion and dedication to transborder students, not only transborder students, but also their families. So with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass on the mic and the sharing screen privileges here to Abraham and Alexis.
Okay, thank you, Doctora. I feel very inspired by everyone that has spoken. I've learned so much, a lot more than I thought I was going to learn. So I have all these questions in my mind that maybe I can ask later. And thank you for helping with the presentation. I never thought I'd be that one guy that was zooming in a car, but it happened today. I want to start off by talking a little bit about Cochise College. We can go to the next slide, please. The college, when you think about colleges that are on the border, Cochise College is literally on the border. We are like 1 mile from the border, or you can see the border wall from our campus. And so the Douglas campus, the Coaches College is a district, so we have several campuses. We're not part of a state system, which I'm assuming Ms. Salgado was talking about a state system of community colleges, which makes your work a little bit more challenging. We're not, we're an independent college. We don't have a state system in the state of Arizona. And so there are some benefits to that, which I'll touch upon. But the Douglas campus, which is the founding campus, is literally right on the border. So we reflect the community that we serve. So 80% of the students that go to the Douglas campus are Latino, and the town that is next to the campus is like 85% Latino. Douglas itself is a small community of 16,000 people, and then Agua Prieta on the other side is about almost 100,000 people. So those are the two towns that we serve, that are part of our community. We have over 90 areas of study. We offer associate and certificate programs. And thanks to new legislation in the state of Arizona, we soon will be offering baccalaureate programs, which we're very excited about, to give local affordable baccalaureate program offerings to our students. We have an academic ESL program and the Douglas campus, because of course it's most of our student population there is English as a second language. And to touch a little bit on what Mrs. Salgado was saying, you know, we, in the state of Arizona, we have propositions like you do in California, right? Which are like double-edged swords sometimes, you know. Sometimes the people get it and sometimes the people don't get it, you know. And so a few years ago, the state of Arizona passed Proposition 300. That proposition, until very recently, did not allow anyone that didn't have proper documentation to get in-state tuition. So when a student applied to go to the community college or any state university, they had to show proof of residency, right? Well, last year, starting in January, actually, Proposition 308 passed. So now a student that graduated from a county high school in our county and that had attended the high school for 2 years, whether they had any documentation or not, is allowed to get in-state tuition. And so that's been a blessing for us. Separately from that, we have an agreement with the state of Sonora, you know, the Mexican state right next to us, where any student that is arriving from the state of Sonora, if of course they're international students on an F1 visa, qualify for in-state tuition, because we have a recognition of the communities that we serve, whether they're technically part of our county or not. You know, a rising tide lifts all boats, so there has to be equitable access for everybody. So we have those couple of things that we're blessed to have and get to, you know, even the playing field for our students. Great. So, you know, it's really interesting because all the presentations today have started about defining who the transborder student is, and you know, and I've learned a little bit by your definitions from the previous presenters, and I put the screen on there because I give similar presentations to our incoming faculty at new faculty orientation, at convocation, things like that, and we try to do some education to them because a lot of them are not part of the border community. They come from different states and metropolitan areas. And so they don't have an understanding, maybe like you all do, of what a transborder life is. And so we start to ask these questions, you know, what is a transborder student? Are they Mexican nationals? Do they live on this side? Do they live on that side? Are they undocumented? And we always get them saying all sorts of different things. But in all reality, it's what you have all said. It's transborder student is, to a degree, what you all have said. There's someone that's living a dual life, right? That's partly on one side and partly on the other side. So in Douglas, where we live, really, you could say almost everybody is living a transborder life because we're really right on the border. And so we have some interaction with both sides of the border to a certain level, whether we want to or not. So all our students are transborder students. So our philosophy is that we treat them all like transborder students, and all the efforts that we have, whether we think that they're living a transborder life or not, is to consider them all as living as transborder students and recognize that whether they are experiencing it or not, that they might have the challenges of your transborder students. So it makes it easier to have that philosophy to say everybody's a transborder student. So let's support them all as transborder students. Okay, so in our work at Cochise College, we have to recognize some things, and that is that the transborder student brings with him or brings with her certain aspects that a non-transborder student doesn't. All the things that you see on the page, any student can bring with him, but the transporter student carries it with him maybe double, right? In two different ways, or maybe triple, right? Because of, where they come from and all that. Remember that the community on the other side of the border, the Frontera community, is not really like any other part of Mexico. Some people say that the Frontera community is really not like Mexico at all, because it's a hodgepodge, a potpourri of things, of people, and of diversity of backgrounds and of cultures that have been created because of migration policy and other things. And so when you look at the screen right here, we have to start to create an understanding of, okay, the students that are coming to learn at the community college, if they're international students, we know that they have a different pedagogical background, that they have a different style of learning, that they have a different classroom experience. And many of those students, even if they graduated from the local American high school, there's a probability that they only attended that high school for a couple of years. And so they carry that with them still, the style of learning and the approaches and the understanding of what education is like growing up as a Mexican national or as a dual citizen person. So that's what we have to put in the back of our head as administrators, as educators, as instructors, and as staff members that are trying to support these students' success. So we have a responsibility, and we're very proud to have that responsibility because for whatever reason, our community college is right there on the border. So we have to take advantage of that blessing. And so we have to create opportunities of understanding for the students that are coming. We have to let them discover who they are as complicated, mixed, diverse, rich people, because that's what they are. That's what you all are. And we have to teach them really in the classroom and outside of the classroom of how to be good communicators of who they are. And at the community college level, we serve students who come, in many cases, under a college level readiness, right? In other words, we have remedial classes, as you call them, and so they don't come with a let's say a freshman level of comprehension in some cases. So the class that I teach, they're all remedial students. So they'll be, I don't want to use this terminology, but they're lower than what you would expect on a placement for a regular college level class, right? And so they may not be at the college level of reading, writing, or math. And so I say that because it tends to be that students that come at that level maybe don't have a full sophistication or practice of how to be good communicators about who they are. And that's important because once they can communicate who they are, then they can advocate on the behalf of themselves. And so a lot of what we try to do in the classroom is practice on that communication. In my class, which is the first year seminar class, we do journaling, as I think Doctor, I think you mentioned that you do reflective journaling, which is a great practice, right? I have learned so much about my students through those journals. I don't grade them on grammar or instruction or that because they're remedial students, but I grade them on them applying what they're thinking on paper. And the more they write, the better they communicate. And so we do a lot of writing. And I remember last semester, I think a student told me something like, I've never done this much writing in my class. And all they did is like 5 minutes of writing at the end of every class. But they may never have done that, right? Because most of the writing they've done is through texting or whatever. And so it's great that they're able to communicate who they are through those journals. And where I can learn as an instructor and read them in a very personal way who they are. And then I can become hopefully a better instructor. Another thing is, of course, we have to celebrate them. And somebody mentioned earlier about celebrating the little things. Well, we try to do that a lot. So like a couple of years ago, we created an endurance award where we give an award to a student just for overcoming a life obstacle. It tends to be in higher education that we celebrate the high learners, right? The the honor students, and all those things that we should celebrate, right? The students that wrote the best things and the students that had the best art and all that. We should celebrate all those things. But the student that's coming in that might be the remedial student, or the student who came in with a little bit more struggles, or who's a C-level student, doesn't get celebrated. And so we have to put those practices into place to be able to give them the motivation and acknowledgement that they can be celebrated, even for just making it to their first semester at a college, which is a big deal for a first generation student who already had to overcome a lot, right, just to get started. And finally, we have to let them stand on their own. And it's always the balance, right? How much do you help a student? And then how much do you just push them to say, hey, you got to figure it out and get down, and I'll help you get back up and keep on going. And so by the time they're done with community college, because we only get to be with them for a couple of years, we hope that they can really stand on their own. And really, I think the transborder student actually is a student that's more likely to be successful, because you think about all the things that they had to get through just to get to the first day of school, right? They had to cross the border, and they had to figure out what financial aid was, which they've never thought about it. And then they had to go back and communicate to their non-English speaking parents. Hey, they told me que tienes que firmar esto. ¿Para qué es, mijo? Well, I think lo que me dijeron. Okay, let me go back, you know. So they have to go through all those steps, right? And remember that the low-income student, well, we try to communicate to the student about the importance of financial aid and planning ahead and deadlines. That's a foreign concept to a low income population. The low income population is thinking about how to get to tomorrow, right? They don't have the luxury and the privilege of saying, well, I'm saving money for next year. Not in an economically depressed community like the one that I live in, where there is no major industry and everyone's in service work. And so we have to think about, how do we talk to students when what we speak is a foreign language to them, literally, figuratively. Okay, so some of what we do in the classroom, this is the exciting part, is connect students with who they are as individuals, right? So you see on this image, these are students in the first year seminar class, like I said, all remedial students, who did what's called a bio poem. So in the little white sheets that you see next to the young ladies there, students learn to write a bio poem, and they say, oh, Mr. I've never written a poem. And, you know, you tell a student to write a poem and it's already intimidating enough, right? Like, oh my gosh, I have to write a poem. You know, I can't even, write or whatever. So we learn to do bio poems, and it's a 9-line structure that starts with their first name, and then there's other lines, and it ends up with their town they live in, and their name. And in those other lines are their desires and their hopes and their greatest fears and their accomplishments and their greatest memory. And I can't remember them all, but it's 9 things. And then when they're done doing that practice, they can actually say, wow, I have a poem that talks about who I am as a person. And it's really difficult to talk about if I asked you right now, who are you? Even though simple things can come to your mind, like I'm a sister, I'm a friend, I'm a student, I'm an instructor. But when you put someone on the spot, it's really hard. They're like, oh, how do I describe myself? And that happens all the time. So it's even harder in writing, because you're afraid to talk about who you are, because you're afraid of what someone's going to think when they read it, And so we have to strip all that stuff away, and empower people to say, oh, it's okay for me to talk about who I am and all the different parts of my identity: student, friend, sister, transborder person, whatever, right? And so that's what the bio poem does. And then this particular exhibition that you're looking at, what we did is we got the students to write bio poems, and then we gave it to art students that didn't know my students, and those art students read the poems and created an artistic illustration of what that poem inspired, what they took away from that poem. Then we took it to an exhibit, and the art student and the writing student met each other for the first time and got to be like, wow, that inspired that artwork, and your words inspired this. And that was really powerful to be like, it's like you get goosebumps when they're standing there next to each other. And then we get to exhibit student work. You know what I mean? We have a publication at the college called The Mirage, and it's the best writing by the best students, which is great. Well, these students would not, at their level of writing, they would never make it into The Mirage yet. But now they can say, wow, I had my bio poem exhibited in front of people at my school at the art gallery. And maybe that was the impetus to say, I can't do it. I can't do something and get in The Mirage next year. And all these poems, of course, are about identity. And here's a couple of examples. I don't know how well you can see that because I'm looking at my phone, but this is one of the really cool ones that a student wrote that her name was Fatima. Fatima was a really interesting student because she grew up in Mexico. And then she moved to a community outside of Douglas, a little agricultural community where it was just basically like cowboys and gringos, you know what I mean? And she had a little bit of a culture shock. And when she came to the college, she had to overcome learning a language, a foreign language, and all that. And so it was really great to have her in her class. And she wrote this little poem that talked about, she says, "I'm afraid of disappointment and failure." And she says right here, she's the one that had to adjust to a new lifestyle and language. And so these are the students that at the age of 18 said these are the biggest things that they had to go through. Then you can see the artwork, of course, where someone interpreted everything that we see. So that was pretty neat. And then we exhibited that there. We exhibited that at the Arizona HSI Consortium, and we exhibited at the consulate, which was really cool. Okay, and this thing you see what's kind of a photo voice. This is another class of students that chose an image that represented the borderlands under a certain category, like motivation or success or different words that they had to choose. And then they wrote about it. And some of them were really deep. And then that got exhibited. And so when somebody would pass by, all they saw was, of course, they don't know who the students are. But when you look at the exhibit, all they could see is, hey, here's an image of the borderlands. And sometimes it's a very obvious image, right? Like a taqueria. But sometimes it's like, something that's on this side of the border. Sometimes it's abstract. Sometimes it's something of nature, but it's all part of the borderlands. And then they could write something about how that image reflected who they were as individuals in the borderlands. And we got to exhibit that, which is really cool. So some of the things that I have here on the side is a photo voice exhibit, journaling, which we talked about. Other things that we've started as initiatives is we have bilingual cafecito times where we invite instructors and students and staff to come and have bilingual conversations. We created a bilingual resources shelf recently where we're able to have bilingual resources in our True Campus libraries, which is pretty cool. And now we started a brand new initiative called Coaches College, Coaches in Espanol, where we have a Facebook page where we communicate for our audience in Spanish, because we realized that our parents and other people that are influencer students were kind of disconnected with how we were communicating. And we started Coaches in Espanol Zoom sessions. So we put out Zoom sessions out there where somebody can connect with us and speak with the representatives of the college in Spanish and ask us questions and connect with us on whatever information they need. And those have been really successful. We've had people from all over the state of Sonora that have joined those. A couple of years ago, we also created a scholarship through our foundation called Education for Everyone that was for strictly undocumented students. And we've been able to award those. And that's been a challenge because it's hard to identify as an undocumented student, and the system doesn't identify you as an undocumented student. So we've had to figure out how to do that, but fortunately have found students that have benefited from that. And then I talked about the Prop 308 already, about the in-state tuition, the new rules in the state. And here's some pictures of the bilingual resources shelf that we started in the library. Those are some of the librarians and the bilingual cafecitos that we've done. And I just want to make sure that we're emphasizing that students have to be represented inside the curriculum and outside. So some of the books that we read in our colleges, like the book Spare Parts, that is true story based on students in a Phoenix high school that went and won a robot competition at Harvard or something like that. We brought that author to speak to them. And so we want them to see themselves in the curriculum, but we also want them to see themselves outside exhibits and through other work. What else do I have on here? Okay, here's the Coaches in Espanol. I just wanted to show you the Zoom sessions, and we're going to set up another new whole list of sessions that we're about to come out. Those have been popular, and we're just trying different things that can reach our transborder audience. As you know, the people that live here right on the border, they tend to communicate through WhatsApp or through other channels that the college doesn't communicate through. And so we want to make sure we want to reach people where they are and where they're comfortable. And over here, I'm very excited to say this thing is called Creando Futuros. We have a new marketing campaign called Creating Futures, and we have like brochures And with the marketing office, we've been able to reprint all those in Spanish and be able to give it out. We passed out hundreds of them last week. We were in Hermosillo at an International Education Day and reaching the people of Hermosillo and all the secundarias and that tecnológicos in Hermosillo, and been able to pass out. So we're blessed to be able to have marketing materials in Spanish now. And hopefully it's just the beginning of those type of things that we could do. Okay, also we have to create opportunities for advocacy for our students. And so we're very blessed that the college dedicates every year a dedicated budget for students to attend the HACU Capital Forum, the Hispanic Association of College and Universities Capital Forum. And this was a couple of weeks ago. A couple of us got to go with these students where they actually get talking points and they get trained on how to talk about how our legislators should support HSI institutions and how our HSI serve our students and all that. And so they got to meet with their actual U.S. senator and their actual U.S. representative and go in there and what they thought was important. And so that was a powerful experience. And you have to remember that a student living in a frontera area, like in a small town like Douglas, Arizona, may have never left their hometown and never gotten a plane and so to them it was a very life-changing thing. And just to be in the halls of Congress and advocating with their actual U.S. senators. So that's a great experience, and I'm glad that the institution dedicates funds for them to be able to do that every year. And a couple of years ago, we wanted to be a little bit more intentional and obvious about who we were as an institution. So we started creating graphics and branding that we could put out there through T-shirts and on our website and all sorts of swag and all that really start advocating about who we are as an HSI. Because one of the challenges with HSI institutions is that they get the designation and they don't know how to handle it. You know what I mean? Because there is no mandate from the government. They just say, if you're serving 25% of Latinos, you're an HSI, yay. And then that opens the door a little bit for you, to get Title V funding and everything. But you have to have a certain attitude of servingness around it, right? So I think we're getting better at that, but we continue to make steps towards progress. And I just want to say that I think this is the last screen for my section, if I remember correctly. Can you go to the next one, Doctora? Let me see. Oh yeah, so the next one is going to be Mr. Moreno, but I just want to say one thing, and that is to say that if a student goes through an academic program at an institution, and everything that they learn is through the textbook and through wonderful instructors, and it's specifically inside the classroom, then they're missing out on the more powerful part of learning, which is to be out in the field, to be out talking to people, creating videos like you all have already done, but to provide the opportunities for the students to go out. For example, I work at a migrant center every Saturday. We try to take students. There are students here in the city of Agua Prieta who have lived here all their lives that didn't even know there was a migrant center in their own community. And so we have to give the opportunity for students to go to the migrant center, to go to the plaza, to go to another volunteer opportunity, to just stand at the border and not worry about being on their phones or living their daily lives, but observing, talking, testing what it is that they're living amongst. I grew up in Douglas, but I moved away all my adult life in New Mexico. When I came back, I never knew and realized until now the richness and the beauty of living in the borderlands, a place like no other place in the world. And so our students have to realize that too, and we have to give them those opportunities. That's it for me, Doctora. If you want to move on to Mr. Moreno, or I'm happy to answer questions.
Yes, we'll move on to Mr. Moreno. Alexis, you have the mic.
Thank you, Doctora. Thank you very much for your invitation to participate. You hear me? Perfect. Let me explain how we collaborate with the transnational student. Let me talk about some numbers at the beginning. The Mexican consulate have a scholarship that was established between the consulate and EMEA scholarships program. It's intended to raise the level of education of the Mexicans residing in the consular jurisdiction. The government of Mexico provides funding for the Mexican living abroad in the holds the mission of contributing of their education at the best development. The Consulate of Mexico provides scholarships to a student born in Mexico or whose parents were born in Mexico. The students must write a personal statement about themselves, what they have chosen the major, and what their educational goals, and how the education at the Cochise College and U of A. Becas initiative has continued uninterruptedly since 2014, managing to collaborate with two of the most popular institutions in our jurisdiction, the Community College, Cochise College, and the University of Arizona. However, after several meetings with the institution, Eastern Arizona College in town of Thatcher, Arizona, we are now in the process of negotiation and legal agreements to have another institution with the Becas scholarships. By 2023, Cochise College alone has benefited 135 students with $1,000 scholarship per student. This is for different degrees, associate degrees, and for the student who wish continued their studies in the university. By my other hand, University of Arizona, through the University of Arizona Foundation, with whom we currently have an MOU, has provided around 68 students scholarships with different amounts, ranging about $800 to $6,000. We are now completing a total of $180,000 since 2014. As you know, it's not easy to get those type of funds. I mean, all your initiatives, all your programs like TASO, TSAP, I mean, all the transnational initiative. I'm very excited with you in that area. Hopefully someday we will have those initiatives here, because I know the feeling for the students. I know what happened every day. Every student have a different story. This is about, I mean, when you ask me about the culture, what we are, I mean, you said at the beginning, no tenemos una cultura física fija porque vivimos y trabajamos en otro lugar. And that is one of the challenges that we have about how can I promote our cultural affairs here, because we need to, we have a challenge how we can promote our programs like the May 5th, La Batalla de Puebla, how we can introduce to the kids, to the students, what happened on those days, because they live here, they have the history here, they study here, but they live in another place. I mean, it's a challenge. If you live here, as you know, it's every kind of program. I mean, to promote our cultural, it's difficult. Actually, we have another programs like September 16, another kind of program like a day parade, and also we have another programs for the 6 to 14 years from 8 to participate in the yearly children's drawing contest. This drawing we promoting in the whole district. We go in to every school and we explain to the kids what we are in Mexico, what is our traditions, what it is our food, whatever. I mean, we try to keep that in their minds. We have a lot of services, but I don't want to be boring, but I just want to let you know what kind of is the more popular and how can is our SID in your community and in our community, the transnational students. We have the revelation studies. I mean, with the people who wants to come to the United States to continue students, how we have services to let them know what is the best way to have those type of papers. We are collaborating now, as Abe mentioned, we have here, we call the Ventanilla de Educación Educativa. I don't know what's to translate exactly, but we have a space here in the consulate where the parents can come to receive information. As you know, like our cultural, we depend directly from the our parents' opinion. We need to explain the parent what is the opportunities, what is the scholarship, what is the challenge that the students have. And that's just the space that we have here. We spoken in Spanish. I mean, to the parents, we make some Zoom meetings with another places like Cananea, with another places in the border region to explain the offer that in this case of the college have. I mean, what kind of carreras, what kind of degrees they have, how much cost, what kind of opportunity, what kind of funding they can have access. And this is the thing here, Vanessa. The consulate, you have those initiatives over there. Please share with the consulates. We are a federal government office, and the thing here is we are middle of the battle also. I mean, we try to look in the best way to give it something to the students. I mean, giving some advices, the best given the some weight. I don't know if I'm explaining it, but that's the point. I mean, give it the space for them here in the consulate in their own country to promote the education. And I don't know what else how can I explain. You already explained everything. This is as you know, the transnational kids, they have their own history daily, the daily basis, and that's the point. How we collaborate, how we can be there. I mean, for them. I don't know. You have another slide.
Yeah, there's a couple more slides there.
Yeah, that's the same thing. There's the numbers, and that's the point. I mean, here we have great colleagues in the different areas, like a college, like a city, like a nonprofit organization. We're working together just to include, I mean, the transnational students in the activities of the city. They are part of the community. We try to pretend, I mean, establish a community with them here. I think yes, we participate in the parade. We have our own parade at Day of the Dead, and we have our festivities September 16. That's the thing. I mean, we are part of the community, and they are part of us.
I wanted to add, Doctora, that the consulado provides the college a space. So we have office hours there on a weekly basis. And we're very appreciative of that, because sometimes going to college campus is like really intimidating for a new person or a parent to say like, vamos a ir al colegio, we don't know anybody. So they feel comfortable going to the consulado donde todos reciben like como familia, and they can meet with us in person. And so I'm there on a weekly basis doing office hours. In addition, we have wonderful relationships with the consulate and the aduana when we do have challenges with students that are crossing the border or that get deported or that have some legal challenges, and we call them and immediately they get their legal help there, and we've been able to navigate some choppy waters and situations in the past. So to be able to fully support the transborder student, you have to have these relationships with all the supporting agencies on both sides of the border to be successful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias, Alexis, Abe. Y sí quiero enfatizar el rol del consulado mexicano para este sentido, estado de pertenencia para los estudiantes transfronterizos de Douglas Agua Prieta. Cuando estaba haciendo mi trabajo de investigación, eso fue uno de los hallazgos, cómo en el consulado se sentían que pertenecían, y era exactamente esto, era estas iniciativas, oportunidades, festividades, ¿no? Uno de los hallazgos era, por ejemplo, celebrar el Día de los Muertos en Estados Unidos y celebrarlo, por ejemplo, en el consulado, ¿no? Experiencias así, en verdad, que crean ese estado de pertenencia y belonging, which is so important for our students.